April 14th, 2018. Eastern Mediterranean. The water is ink, the sky a lid of cloud. In a steel cylinder deeper than church basements and quieter than midnight snow, recycled air tastes faintly of coffee and amine. Rubber soles whisper over non-skid. Somewhere aft, a pump changes pitch. One note, then none. The ocean takes the hint and closes around the hull like velvet. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Harlan, U.S. Navy, attack boat skipper, son of a New England machinist, stands behind the periscope well that no longer holds a periscope. He steadies himself with the kind of stillness you only learn at sea. On a display the size of a magazine cover, night vision turns the surface into green rain. He nods once. No words. A hand signal passes to the fire control coordinator, to the weapons officer, to the men whose job is to make policy move at 550 knots under 1,000 miles of weather. Most war stories begin with noise. This one begins with its opposite. On a Virginia-class submarine, victory smells like ozone and warm electronics. It feels like a carpet of hush, every step measured, every whisper weighed. They called the new attack boats too complex, too digital, too careful. They laughed at the idea that in the age of satellites, a submarine could still own an ocean. They stopped laughing when the sea went blind. For Sonar Chief Mike Mick Turner, New Jersey vowels and 20 years in the fleet, tonight isn't just a mission. It's a promise he made to himself back when older boats still had a periscope shaft and the world was not yet mapped in pixels. He leans into his headphones, eyes half closed, the way pianists listen to the space between notes. The Atlantic taught him something no manual ever wrote. The ocean is a choir. Cargo ships sing in slow baritone. Fishing trawlers clatter like cutlery in a drawer. Wind makes a high hiss. Dolphins chatter like children in church. Your boat must be the one voice that never joins the song. Con, sonar. Control tonal steady bearing. Merchant, distant, he says, voice low, almost tender. Routine words, the ritual of a craft older than jets and younger than myth. He feels the deck quiver as the ship's brain, arrays, processors, algorithms, does what American machines have always done, turn raw reality into ordered truth. You see, most people think a submarine is a tube with torpedoes. It isn't. It's a floating decision. Steel hides it. Schooling trains it. But what wins is the discipline of silence. The truth was, after the Cold War faded, some believed the undersea game had ended. Cameras in space, drones on the surface, satellites listening to every spark on every wire. Surely the ocean had surrendered its secrets. What they didn't know is that the ocean keeps faith with those who learn its grammar. And America did. Harlan glances at the clock. In Virginia boats, time doesn't tick. It locks. A fire control solution is a kind of prayer. Angles whispered to physics, velocities bargained with fate. Behind him, the strike crew moves like stagehands in a dark theater. One panel lit, another dimmed. A checklist closed with the quiet authority of men who know that checklists are written in casualty ink. Verify target packages. Click. Match coordinates. Click. Weapons green. The weapons officer doesn't look heroic. He looks inevitable. On the other side of the world, desks, flags, calls, someone has already weighed arguments and adjectives. In this compartment, only nouns remain. Bearing, range, depth, speed. The Virginia doesn't ask why. It asks how far, how fast, how hidden. Freedom brought purpose. America brought the system. Harlan's fingers caress the edge of the console the way a pilot might touch a throttle before takeoff. He remembers his father's hands, scarred from machine oil, nicked by tools, closing around a wrench the way a farmer grips a plow. Make it smooth, son, the older man used to say. Smooth is strong. The Navy would later teach Harlan equations the old shop never named, but the lesson was the same. Strength is the art of reducing shock to nothing. The order goes out in a voice that could pass for a library's. A hatch opens somewhere in the bow, and with a dry, mechanical sigh that seems almost bashful, the first bird leaves the nest. There is no roar. There is no cinematic plume. Just a firm, hydraulic handshake. A ghost pushed upward until sea becomes sky, and sky becomes contrail, and contrail becomes consequence. Then another. Then another. In the control room, the men do not cheer. They do not fist bump. They mark bearings, check seals, listen for trouble that never arrives. Sonar Chief Turner waits for the telltale rumor of a distant propeller altering course, for the dull thud of a merchant's wake changing hue on his display, for anything that says the ocean noticed. Nothing. Perfect. Nothing. The kind of nothing that makes professionals smile. And that's when the world understood, again, that the United States had built a ship that doesn't so much fight as it arranges the fight. A submarine that moves like a rumor and hits like a verdict. A boat whose engine runs on quiet, whose weapons travel under weather and beyond speeches. It wasn't just a submarine. It was America's handwriting on the world's largest blackboard. Chalk strokes no one could see until the math solved itself. Hours later, when the last message is acknowledged and the crew cycles back to the small eternities of watch standing, coffee warmed over, stories retold in whispers, a photo taped near a console, Harlan walks the length of his ship. He feels the life under his feet, the reactor's steady pulse, the ducted propulsor's almost imagined hum, the breathing of 100 souls who have made peace with long silence. The ocean outside remains a theater with no audience. The bow parts it like gospel paper. They brought noise, the old salts used to say. We brought order. And in that dark, disciplined room where America's second skin meets the sea, a single thought burns steady as a pilot light. God, I'm proud we built this.
The bow parts it like gospel paper. They brought noise, the old salts used to say. We brought order. And in that dark, disciplined room where America's second skin meets the sea, a single thought burns steady as a pilot light. God, I'm proud we built this. Pull back the camera. The year is 1993. The Cold War has ended with a thud like a steel door closing in a distant corridor. In Washington, someone coins a polite phrase, peace dividend, and budgets follow it like iron filings to a magnet. Submarines, to many, look like yesterday's weapon. Expensive, secretive, engineered for a Soviet fleet that has dissolved into flags and paperwork. They laughed at the idea of building a new attack boat in an age of satellites and televised wars. They stopped laughing when they remembered that oceans still swallow secrets whole. In a fluorescent conference room at Electric Boat, coffee rings mark a drawing set as thick as a family Bible. A systems engineer named Ellen Pierce, hair pinned back, pencil smudges on her fingers, argues for something counterintuitive. Not the fastest boat, not the deepest, but the quietest mind. We're not building a hammer, she says to a room of welders, programmers, and old-school chiefs turned project managers. We're building an instrument. The sea is our concert hall. Across the river and hundreds of miles south at Newport News, a foreman named Darnell Brooks walks the yard with a dog-eared notebook and a single sentence written on the first page. Make silence repeatable. You see, the Seawolf class had been the pinnacle. Blue water predators built to outrun and outdive anything afloat. Then reality knocked. Too costly for the era's patience. Too specialized for a world that suddenly needed to sniff the shallows as much as stalk the deeps. The truth was, America didn't turn away from excellence. It reframed it. The Virginia would fuse Cold War wisdom with peacetime frugality and wartime flexibility. It would trade raw speed for acoustic invisibility, swap welded dogma for modular common sense, and carry in its hull the idea that tomorrow's fight could be anywhere, from ice to estuary. Critics misread the blueprint the way people misread a score without hearing the music. Too digital, they said. Saltwater eats computers. What they didn't know was that American shipyards had learned to harden code the way they harden hulls. Shock-mounting servers, isolating vibrations, wrapping brains in rubber and redundancy. "Too complex," came the chorus. Ellen smiled and traced a line on the schematic where a 19th century idea, the periscope, vanished. In its place, a photonics mast, all lenses and electrons, no giant tubes stabbing through decks. That single choice freed entire compartments, lowered signatures, and turned the control room into a place designed by logic, not by a Victorian telescope. "Too cautious," others tutted. Darnell only shrugged and walked his yard again, listening to the language of steel. Caution keeps you alive long enough to be bold. Mechanisms became metaphors. The pump jet propulsor didn't just push water. It needed it, mixing wake into silence the way a careful hand folds air into batter. The large aperture bow array didn't just listen. It wrapped its ear around the ocean's throat and felt for heartbeats others missed. Anechoic tiles didn't just cling to the hull. They were scales on a modern Leviathan, each piece drinking sound and refusing to burp it back. Fly-by-wire ship control didn't just steer. It translated human intent into precise fin angles, turning a 7,000-ton machine into a dancer that could hold depth like a sniper holds breath. Most people think modularity is an accountant's word. On Virginia, it's a warfighter's prayer. Mission bays that swap gear like a toolbox. Special operators sailing in the belly of the beast. Unmanned vehicles sliding out to map mines. Vertical tubes that can house a choir of missiles or a single patient idea waiting for the right night. The design whispered a promise. If the mission changes, the boat won't age. It will adapt. That is not compromise. That is American stubbornness, engineered. Industry, too, learned a new rhythm. Electric Boat and Newport News, once rivals like boxers who respected each other's jab, did something strange. They teamed. Each yard built sections as if assembling a cathedral in pieces, trading modules across state lines, matching tolerances the width of a pencil lead. It wasn't just a contract, it was choreography. Welders in Virginia would finish a section begun by fitters in Connecticut. Inspectors would sign off on someone else's pride. And somewhere in that dance, a lesson from the arsenal of democracy resurfaced. When Americans divide labor, they multiply strength. And still, the misunderstandings persisted. "Satellites see everything," said the pundits, as if orbits could read the ocean's diary. "Shallow water is the sub's graveyard," said the old books, written for another century's propellers. But the Virginia class was built to thread littorals like a fox in hedgerows, banking on exquisite navigation, low-frequency arrays, and that most classic of American advantages, the willingness to practice the boring parts until they look like magic. They brought theory. America brought procedure. For the men who would later stand watch in those rooms without periscopes, the origin story mattered. Sonar Chief Turner would have loved Ellen's stubborn pencil, Darnell's yard-worn notebook. Lieutenant Commander Harlan would have nodded at the notion that a boat is a floating decision. Because that's what the 1990s demanded. A choice to keep faith with the invisible frontier when the headlines chose flashier screens. The choice to bet on engineers in coveralls and coders in hoodies, on quiet pumps and conscience-quiet crews. Irony hangs in the air like the damp in a dockhouse. They said the age of submarines was over. Then America built one that could own not just the deep, but the narrative. They said complexity would fail. It didn't. It fused into a hull that hums like a held note. They said budgets would neuter genius. Instead, genius learned to budget. Cutting waste, not wonder. By the time the first Virginia slid down the ways, the joke had curdled. The ocean hadn't retired. It had simply chosen fewer confidants. And the United States, patient as a machinist polishing a bearing, became its best friend again.
The launch of the first Virginia-class submarine marked a significant turning point in America's maritime history. This advanced vessel represented a new era, reflecting the nation's evolving relationship with the ocean and its commitment to technological innovation. As the submarine prepared for its initial trials, anticipation ran high among naval engineers, military strategists, and the public alike. The Virginia class promised enhanced stealth, agility, and versatility, setting new standards for undersea operations. Its debut was more than just a technological milestone. It symbolized the future of naval defense and exploration. The excitement surrounding its performance underscored the importance of these trials, which would determine the submarine's readiness for the challenges ahead.
Shallow water was the boogeyman from older texts. Literal acoustics are dirty. Reverberation, shipping, shrimp that snap like static on vinyl. Sonar Chief Turner joined for one of those early evolutions. He sat, headphones on, while the large aperture bow array fed him a world that wasn't fuzzy after all. It was layered. Low-frequency passive pulled ship's heartbeats out of the soup. High-frequency active, used with the restraint of a surgeon, sketched the near field without shouting at it. Unmanned vehicles launched like patient ferrets to map the contours of a minefield. Most people think sonar hears sound, he muttered to a junior. It listens to order. We impose it. When a contact of interest tiptoed behind a pier shadow, Turner's team held it, threading bearing drift through tide and rumor until the target's mistake, not theirs, announced a solution. And then the ugly day, the one every program endures and pretends it won't. A hot run in a shore test, a battery pack for an unmanned system arced, smoke-kissed insulation, and a compartment filled with the sour tang of burned epoxy. No one died. That's important. But pride took a bruise. Darnell stood in the space afterward, held silence like a tool, and finally said, "We forgot to ask one more stupid question." They tore into wiring routes, added separation that made a short stay short, wrapped conductors in materials that don't give up in heat, and updated checklists so dumb a genius could follow them at 0300. It wasn't theater. It was humility, welded. Revelation didn't arrive as a banner. It crept. The wine vanished. The porpoising calmed. The room moved like a chamber orchestra, each musician reading the same bar. The acoustic range plot grew clean enough to make the old chiefs squint and grin. The boat stopped being a project and started being a presence. They laughed at digital boats, someone said over midnight coffee. They stopped laughing when this one walked sideways in a harbor without touching a line. Because here was another quiet miracle. Precise thrusters and control surfaces that could slide a 7,000-ton ship into a pier pocket like a hand into a glove. It wasn't just a submarine, it was a scalpel that could lift a single hair without cutting the skin. On the last day of trials, as dawn pulled a gray ribbon across the east, Harlan stood again in control. The sea was down, the horizon honest. He looked around at the faces. Ellen's ink-stained determination, Turner's patient hunter's calm, a dozen sailors learning to trust a room that trusted them back. And that's when the world understood, he thought, not as a boast, but as a benediction. This machine doesn't perform, it behaves. America had taught steel to keep a promise, and that's when the world understood, he thought, not as a boast, but as a benediction. This machine doesn't perform. It behaves. America had taught steel to keep a promise. April 14th, 2018. Eastern Mediterranean. The sea smells of diesel ghosts and wet stone, the kind of night when waves don't break so much as breathe. Inside the attack center, the air is cool and dry, a library of light. Lieutenant Commander Harlan stands just aft of the pilot's chair, one hand resting on the console edge, the way a craftsman touches a bench before the first cut. Sonar Chief Turner has his headset on, eyes half-lidded, listening for the wrong kind of miracle. Some hint the ocean has noticed them. It hasn't. Above them, nations talk. Below them, America acts. Targets have names only planners love, coordinates, grids, aim points. But the crew knows what they mean. Punishment for a regime that thought chemistry could terrorize civilians. The boat is a Block 3 Virginia, where earlier sisters carried 12 individual strike cells. This one holds 2 broad Virginia payload tubes, each a carousel of quiet decisions. You see, the tubes aren't about capacity, they're about rhythm. Fewer openings in the bow mean fewer places for noise to be born, and fewer places for the sea to leak truth. Strike package confirmed. The weapons officer's voice is the tone of an equation solved. Wind aloft nominal, no-fly zones honored, blue routes deconflicted. People think missiles are bravado. They aren't. They're paperwork made kinetic. The truth was, tonight's work will pass through more safety gates than an airliner, because power is responsible or it isn't American. Harlan nods. The order is routine, because routine is sacred. Hatches cycle. A gas generator shoves the first tomahawk from its cradle, a ghost pushed toward a ceiling no human hand can touch. The missile breaches, feels air, lights its booster, and writes a brief signature on the sky, too brief and too far from where anyone is looking. Then another, then another. Flight computers talk to birds already inbound from surface ships and allied aircraft, negotiating altitude like polite drivers sharing lanes. Block 4 brains reach back through the ether for any last-minute retouch to the plan. Distance collapses into time. Minutes become angles. The crew doesn't celebrate. They verify. They listen. Turner keeps his world small, bearing lines, flow noise, merchant props far off, the tidy tick of his own pulse in the headset foam. Somewhere to the north, coastal radars wake and sweep, their electronic broom bristling at mid-sky echoes that are already gone. Somewhere ashore, command vans argue over plots that don't add up. They brought sensors. America brought silence. Ashore, the first detonations are surgical, not cinematic. Rooflines unzip, pressure waves fold laboratories inward, transformers cough blue. In an operations room whose language Harlan does not speak, an officer stares at a board where inbound tracks carry no parentage. Air to surface? Some. Ship launched? Surely. Submarine? He doesn't want to say it aloud. Because if a submarine fired and they didn't see it, then the coastline, with all its radars and lookouts and microphones on piers, was a stage set in the wrong play. Back under the weather, the boat turns as if deciding, then slides away from where the world will look, not quickly, not nervously, just with the steady competence of a pickpocket leaving a crowded street. That pump jet at the stern doesn't churn. It needs. Ducted veins tilt in fractions of degrees, folding wake into whisper. Fly-by-wire holds depth like a held breath. In control, a junior officer watches the ship's track redraw and feels something he will name later. Not thrill, not relief. Respect. For the machine, for the system that made it, for the idea that power can move with grace. You see, most people think first combat is where heroes shout and cameras catch light. It isn't. It's where doctrine meets reality and shakes hands. The photonics mast lifts once, shy of the surface, opens its glass eye, and steals a sliver of horizon. No ships closing, no helicopters throwing dice above. Back down. The sea reseals its vow. In sonar, Turner smiles at an absence only he can love. No new tonals, no change in the deep hiss that means you are alone. Continue. The call goes out through channels diplomats arranged weeks ago. Deconfliction lines hum with words that say nothing and signal everything. On destroyers farther west, Aegis screens comb the sky for angry leftovers. In operations rooms farther east, operators watch missiles thread needle holes and vanish into maps. The Virginia is not on any of those screens. It exists in the negative space, defined by what others cannot find. Enemy realization does not come with a headline. It comes with a staff memo no one wants to sign. It comes with a captain's quiet order to listen harder at the river mouth, with more patrol boats idling in the night, with a rumor in a mess hall that something is out there, even though no wake was seen, no periscope hummed, no diesel breath kissed the air. The next morning, a coastal paper prints a photograph of a broken roof and a mangled gate. Somewhere in the same city, a colonel sips bitter tea and thinks of the sea as if it were a person who lied to him. In control, the boat returns to the business of not being interesting. Coffee reheats. A petty officer folds a note from home and tucks it into a pocket where good luck lives. Harlan walks the deck plates and lets his fingertips graze the frame of a watertight door, a tiny private thanks to steel that did not complain. He thinks of the welders at Newport News, the fitters at Electric Boat, the programmers who argued commas in code that now holds depth within a foot. He thinks of a nation that chose to be exact. And that's when the world understood, a narrator might say. But the men aboard do not narrate. They maintain. They plan. They prepare to do it again, tomorrow or not for a year. Because victory isn't the strike. It's the option. It's the knowledge that in a night like this, the United States can reach through water and distance and politics and touch exactly what it means to. They brought noise. America brought order. And somewhere, in the silence after impact, freedom took a breath. They brought noise. America brought order. And somewhere, in the silence after impact, freedom took a breath. Dawn in Groton looks different after a night like that. The river wears a pale mist, and cranes stand like patient herons over sections of hull wrapped in tarps and promise. In a design office that smells of coffee and laser printer heat, Ellen Pierce circles a delivery date on a wall calendar and pins a yellow note beneath it. Make silence repeatable. 800 miles south in Newport News, Darnell Brooks walks the yard before the whistles blow, fingertips grazing steel still warm from last night's weld. Across both yards, the day's choreography has already begun. Modules moving by rail and barge, ring sections measured with laser trackers until their fit-up gap is the width of a pencil shaving. This is not romance. This is a drumbeat. 2 boats a year, then more, then better. The nation's second skin thickening by schedule, not by speech. You see, a single strike proves capability. A system proves civilization. The Virginia class isn't merely a submarine. It's a network of minds, machines, and methods that turns oceans into honest terrain. Open architecture combat systems accept new code like a veteran welcoming a rookie, respectfully, but with rules. Acoustic rapid COTS. Insertion stacks commercial processors, isolates them from shock, and feeds them software updates peerside. A chef sharpening knives between courses. Tech insertion blocks roll in like seasons. New towed arrays, smarter displays, unmanned vehicles with longer patience, without tearing out the soul of the ship. The truth was, America remembered something from the arsenal of democracy. Improvement must be a habit, not an event. In a low building near the waterfront, a class of sailors sits in a simulator room where the air is dim and the ocean is numbers. They run the night again. Contact management, massed discipline, the quiet art of being present without being perceived. An instructor with a submarine warfare pin older than some students quips, "Amateurs talk heroics, professionals talk procedures." They brought courage. America brought checklists. And those checklists are written in the ink of other people's mistakes, so these kids don't have to make them twice. Industrial strength is not just tonnage, it's choreography. Electric Boat and Newport News, rivals once, partners now, trade modules the way musicians trade riffs. Groton frames a bow with the large aperture array embedded like a cathedral window. Newport News mates a reactor compartment whose tolerances are the difference between perfect heat and unforgivable noise. A section built by one yard is closed by the other, inspected by both, certified by a culture that knows pride is the step before error. Trucks carry cabling harnesses built in Midwestern towns, where the local high school team plays under lights, made by the same factory that extrudes insulation for sonar lines. Somewhere in Indiana, a woman named Rosa crimps the last connector on a bundle that will disappear inside frames and never be seen again. She kisses 2 fingers and taps the tape wrap. "For you, kid," she whispers, thinking of a nephew at sea. Logistics is where the cartoon ends and the Republic begins. Spare parts are not improvisations. They are a covenant. Commonality across blocks means a pump seal shipped to Guam will fit a boat built in Virginia, and a software image loaded in Pearl will behave on a hull launched in Connecticut. A weapons station in the desert can assemble a canister that slides into a payload tube whose micrometers were zeroed 3 years and 5 states away. On a pier, weeks after a mission no one will name, a tender crew tops off stores with the same neat insistence that wins basketball games in March. Fundamentals, repeated until boredom looks a lot like excellence. The fleet joins the dance. P-8 patrol aircraft sling sonobuoys in patterns that look like careless geometry, but are not. Satellites pass overhead, with their eyes respectfully closed at the moment they should be. Windows of emission open and close ashore in rhythms only a few watch officers understand. The Virginia doesn't seek applause. It expects coordination. It is the quiet instrument in a symphony that includes destroyers pulling picket duty, Marines rehearsing raids they hope they'll never need, and analysts in windowless rooms teaching machines to sort ocean noise from ocean truth. They brought sensors. America brought systems. Back in the yards, Block 5 sections grow long with a new idea. More room for more decisions. A module of payload that turns one boat into a chorus when the night requires a louder hymn. Critics read spreadsheets and mutter. Ellen reads margins and smiles. The added length is not bloat, it's leverage. It means the nation can surge firepower without building a separate fleet, can add mission packages without begging physics for forgiveness. Meanwhile, earlier sisters take their midlife updates, a new sail sensor here, better quieting there, like athletes who never stop stretching because youth is a choice for those who prepare. Superiority does not end at the dry dock gate. It runs through weld schools where a teenager learns to stack dimes along a seam until the bead looks like jewelry. It runs through reactor training where officers learn to respect the invisible and never ever guess. It runs through supply depots where forklifts hum past shelves arranged so precisely a librarian would blush. It even runs through the culture of secrecy that remembers secrecy is not silence, it is stewardship. The world doesn't need to know the angle of a blade. It needs to know that the blade exists, and it serves freedom. On a late shift, Darnell pulls out his dog-eared notebook and flips to the first line he ever wrote for this program. Make silence repeatable. He watches a perfectly machined ring lift onto a transporter, sees a young welder, mask up, eyes bright, check a route pass like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. In that moment, he feels the power of an American idea older than any one hull number. We do not depend on miracles. We build processes that make miracles ordinary. And that's when the world understood, again, that the Virginia class wasn't winning because it was a single wonder of steel. It was winning because a free nation had arranged men and women, tools and timelines, brains, and budgets into a machine larger than any ship and quieter than any boast. A machine that turns intention into deterrence, and, when asked, deterrence into precision.
And a machine that turns intention into deterrence, and, when asked, deterrence into precision. Weeks after the strike, the ocean pretends nothing happened. That's its way. Swells keep their appointments with distant shores. Tankers grind their slow arithmetic from canal to cape. Gulls draw white handwriting in morning air. Deep beneath, a hull of American steel moves as if sleepwalking. Steady reactors, quiet pumps, men at stations shaping boredom into vigilance. Lieutenant Commander Harlan walks the length of control on sock-soft feet, the rubber giving just enough to remind him that noise is a tax they never pay. He pauses near the helm, fingers grazing the edge of the console the way some men touch a church pew before kneeling. Smooth as strong, he hears in his father's voice and feels the truth a second time. Power, when it's built right, isn't loud, it's inevitable. The world says success and moves on to other headlines. But in Groton and Newport News, the aftermath is not relief, it's revision. Ellen Pierce marks up a post-mission brief with her faithful pencil, drawing arrows toward words that look unromantic. Latency, threshold, human-machine interface, and underlines a phrase twice. Lessons captured. You see, most people think aftermath is the credits rolling. It isn't. It's the next draft. The truth was, the boat performed. Now the system must absorb what the boat learned. Software teams adjust the display so the operator's eye finds the right corner half a second sooner. A vendor swaps a bearing compound for one that drinks just a little more vibration at a certain revolution band. Tiny things, almost petty. Victory is a mosaic of pettiness done perfectly. On the other side of the ocean, men in uniforms not sewn here hold quiet, anxious meetings. Patrol boats run longer routes with engines idling at odd hours. Coastal microphones pop up on jetties like mushrooms after rain. A colonel writes an order with a shaky pen.
Mark.
Increased readiness level of radar sights. He is not a fool. He knows what he didn't see is what matters. Enemy realization isn't thunder. It's the silence left behind by a ship that never asked permission to exist. They brought suspicion. America brought discipline. In the Virginia's mess, coffee steams in mugs with chipped rims, and Sonar Chief Turner tells a seaman a story he's told before because the boy needs to hear it again. People think this job is romance, he says, leaning back so the chair squeaks. It's repetition. He taps the table twice, the beat of a practiced habit. We hold the ocean in a steady frame until it blinks. That blink is where we live. The kid nods, not fully understanding. He will. He will the first time a distant screw loses a single blade, and the tone shifts by a hair. And he catches it, and a room quietly reorients itself around his noticing. For Turner, it isn't just a mission. It's the craft that saved his friends a dozen times without ever needing to be thanked.
Proceed.
Above the waterline of politics and commentary, another truth glides. These boats are not just weapons, they are promises. Promises made by welders to officers they'll never meet, by programmers to chiefs they'll never see, by taxpayers to sons whose photographs ride inside red-tagged lockers. And the promise reads like this. When America needs to be present but not seen, decisive but not reckless, exact but not theatrical, we can be. They brought myths. The old propaganda reels might have said, we brought math. Not cold math, conscience math.
You see, a Virginia-class submarine is not an isolated miracle. It's a memory palace of the Republic. The reactor remembers a physics teacher in Iowa who stayed after school to explain why criticality isn't catastrophe when you hold it by the rules. The hull remembers the welder who practiced the same 6-inch bead until her wrist knew angles like prayer. The control laws remember a test flight of code that rolled too eagerly and embarrassed the ship until someone humbled it into steadiness. The mast remembers sailors learning to stop reaching for a ghost periscope and start sharing a wider eye. And America remembers, through all of it, that courage fights battles, but systems win wars. Harlan signs the log, a thin trail of ink in a book that will outlive his commission. On Liberty, he will mail a postcard to his father, a harbor view, cranes like folded knives, a short note, still smooth, still strong. In another building, Ellen will take her pencil and finally erase a scribble that has lived on one panel drawing for far too long. In the yard, Darnell will watch a ring section lower onto a transporter and say, "Good," in a voice nobody hears but everyone feels. In classrooms and shops and quiet rooms with no windows, Americans do the same American thing. They tune, they align, they tighten until play becomes precision. The ocean rewards that. And what of legacy? The young will take the watch. A girl in a welding school will stack a bead so perfect an old inspector will smile with one side of his mouth. A midshipman will learn that silent service isn't a phrase, it's a character test. A programmer will push an update that keeps a pump from singing at a cursed harmonic. A petty officer will teach a fresh seaman that you never, ever drag a chair on non-skid. Nothing here is heroic alone. Together, it's destiny made ordinary. If the story has a moral, it is not triumph shouted from a balcony. It is a sentence whispered in steel and discipline. We built something that does exactly what a free nation needs. Nothing more, nothing less, again and again. They brought noise. America brought order. Not the brittle order of fear, but the resilient order of procedure, of talent, of truth checked and rechecked until the ocean itself nods. Night falls somewhere over a coast that once believed itself safe from consequences. Far out to sea, the Virginia class keeps its counsel. The wake closes, the instruments glow. The men breathe in rhythm with a reactor that will outlast careers and elections. It wasn't just a submarine. It was America's quiet hand on the world's vast shoulder, steady as a machinist's grip, reminding history that freedom travels well in silence. That was the day America stopped chasing history and started writing it.